Hi, my name is Stefano Baldassari. I'm director of the International Studies Institute in Florence, a study abroad program whose headquarters is Palazzo Rucellai, the beautiful Renaissance building designed by Leon Battista Alberti in the mid-15th century. I've taught Italian literature for many years at the International Studies Institute before becoming its director. In regard to my field of research, since the early 1990s I've published several critical editions of humanist Latin and Italian works. More precisely, I edited various works by Manetti and an anonymous vernacular biography of this author, a Latin text by Antonio Loschi, that is, his invective against Florence, two by Leonardo Bruni, the Dialogi and the Laudatio Florentina Urbis, and a couple by Coluccio Salutati, the De Tiranno and his reply to Loschi's invective against Florence. What I would like to share with you today in this short introductory video is some of the skills I've learned from working on these critical editions of humanist texts and the experience I have gained from discussing philology with colleagues from different countries in the last 20 years or so. First, I must confess that, unfortunately, most people perceive philology as a rather arid and boring discipline. I mean, they do so provided they have any notion of its existence and distinguish philology from philosophy or other subjects with similar names. This is indeed a pity. Even scholars who declare to be fascinated by philology and claim to hold it in high esteem sometimes pass negative judgment on this subject. Edward Said, for one, wrote a plea in favor of philology, calling for a return to its basic, enlightening teachings. And yet, even so great and versatile a scholar as Said could not but label philology, in a rather sexist fashion, one may say, as the most frigid of the muses. This makes it sound at best as the good old school that never seems to have been young, to echo a witty remark by Charles Dickens. Actually, if we wish to do philology any justice, as I believe we should, we better begin by stating that philology applies to all sorts of texts, not just lofty classical writings in Greek or Latin. It can be profitably applied, and in some cases it has been profitably applied, even to children's literature. I'd like to begin by offering two simple examples dealing with classics in this genre. I hope this may help break the ice, so to speak, and show that we can exercise our philological skills and take examples from all kinds of writings, including such apparently humble and easy ones like Pinocchio and Charlotte's Web. The first, that is the 1883 edition of Carlo Lorenzini's book, although the author is better known by the pen name of Collodi from the Tuscan hamlet near Pistoia, where his mother was born, bears a subtle mistake in the very first line of chapter 6. In this section of the book, Collodi tells us how Pinocchio, the animated marionette that a poor woodcarver named Geppetto has just created, falls asleep next to the fire, only to wake up the following morning with both his feet burned. The chapter opens as follows, in Italian. Per l'appunto era una nottataccia d'inverno. Tuonava forte forte, lampeggiava come se il cielo pigliasse fuoco. The italics you see on the text are mine, to be clear. One of the many plausible English translations of this passage would read as follows. It was indeed an awful winter night. It thundered loudly. It flashed as if the sky were catching on fire. Again, the italics appearing here are mine. Now, what's the problem here? The best critical edition of Pinocchio, that is the one by the Italian philologist Ornella Castellani Polidori, has shown that the correct reading is as follows. Per l'appunto era una nottataccia d'inferno. Tuonava forte forte, lampeggiava come se il cielo pigliasse fuoco. That is, although the first reading, in which inverno translates to winter, makes perfect sense, it must be replaced by inferno, meaning hellish, that is, metaphorically speaking, awful. This is shown both by external and internal evidence, that is, by a comparison between the various editions, external evidence, by the author's style, and by the notion of lectio difficilior, the more difficult reading of the two, a crucial notion to which we shall return later when providing examples from humanist Latin texts. In light of this, the correct English translation must be changed to "it was indeed a hellish night," thus abandoning the utterly plausible the form "it was indeed an awful winter night," which must then be relegated to the so-called apparatus, to use philological jargon, at the foot of the page. This short passage from Pinocchio offers us an easy example of how philologists must sometimes intervene and change the text that has hitherto been regarded as the authoritative version, the Vulgate, one might call it, adopting this expression from biblical studies. A common mistake, however, is the opposite, that is, intervening too much. Sometimes this attitude is dictated by a rather mechanical approach to literature, as we shall soon see by studying a case from 15th century humanist literature. Or, on the contrary, it can be the result of a scholar's big ego. Caution is certainly one of the golden rules that all good philologists must follow. The egotistical, narcissistic impulse to intervene can cause much more damage than a passive, dull transcription. Likewise, parsimony is an excellent principle both in life in general and in philology, especially if a corrupt passage demands the editor's intervention. In such a case, the first thing we have to determine is if the passage in question is corrupt, that is, damaged, or not. Let me give a quick example by playing for a minute, if I may, with E.B. White's Charlotte's Web. Let's pretend that we're dealing with an ancient text that has come down to us through various centuries. In Chapter 6, again, like in Pinocchio, only this time it's titled Summer Days, the goslings are born in the Zuckerman's barn. The passage in question reads as follows. When the first gosling poked its gray-green head through the goose's feathers and looked around, Charlotte spied it and made the announcement. I'm sure, she said, that every one of us here will be gratified to learn that after 4 weeks of unremitting effort and patience on the part of our friend the goose, she now has something to show for it. The goslings have arrived. May I offer my sincere congratulations. A few pages later, 9 exactly, in the 2012 Harper edition, Fern, the little girl in this classic, as I believe you all know, reports Charlotte's speech to her bewildered parents as follows. She, meaning Charlotte the spider, made a speech. She said, I'm sure that every one of us here in the barn cellar will be gratified to learn that after 4 weeks of unremitting effort and patience on the part of the goose, she now has something to show for it. Don't you think that was a pleasant thing for her to say? A pleasant thing indeed, a philologist or a scribe of a certain kind may comment, but not the exact same words as in Charlotte's original speech. If this were an ancient text, some philologists or scribes may be tempted to intervene and change Fern's words to make them agree entirely with what Charlotte said. This may sound like an odd, if not even absurd behavior, but, as we shall see, some modern philologists have raised hypotheses about humanist texts that are not very different from this. More important still, many medieval and Renaissance scribes have taken such liberties and much more when transcribing text, whether ancient or recent. This too we shall soon see and provide some examples. And now a few general reflections on this fascinating, truly interdisciplinary discipline before we move on to the next section. Philology helps us get into the texture, the very fabric, so to speak, of the text and its author's workshop. It helps us trace the various phases that led to its making and the many cultural features that determine its circulation, whether successful or not, long-lived or short-lived. However, philology can teach us above all 2 great virtues, patience and humility. We must make our peace with one basic fact. No matter how careful and detailed our research might be, there will always remain something ultimately elusive about any given text. Sure enough, as philologists, we must strive to shed as much light as possible on the writings we study, that is, their origins, the reception, and interpretations over time. And yet, at the same time, we must always bear in mind that, as the famous French poet Paul Valéry once said, there is no such thing as a finished text. Authors simply abandon their text at some point. That's all. This said, I think it's now time to begin with some general basic principles about all philological endeavors and their ultimate goal, that is, the making of a critical edition.